Don Rafael Mendoza, a 75-year-old billionaire, had completely lost faith in humanity. Hiring Carmen, a young 25-year-old housekeeper, he decided to test her in the cruelest way. He left his armored safe open with 5 million euros inside, pretending to have left the house. What he saw through the surveillance cameras shocked him so much that it forever changed his view of people. Carmen did not do what Don Rafael expected. She did something completely unexpected that brought him to tears and revealed a secret neither of them could have imagined. Important events were unfolding in the Mendoza mansion, majestically rising in the hills of the Sierra de Madrid mountain range, near El Escorial. Don Rafael Mendoza, at 75, was one of the wealthiest men in Spain, but all his fortune couldn't buy him what he truly desired: sincere people by his side. Over the last 10 years, Don Rafael discovered that everyone who approached him had only one interest: his money. His nephew tried to declare him incapacitated to seize the inheritance. His niece stole 100,000 euros from his personal account. Even his trusted doctor overbilled him for years. The last straw was discovering that his 20-year-old housekeeper was selling his artwork online. That woman, whom he called Grandpa Rafael, turned his home into a black market for antiques. Since then, Don Rafael lived alone in the 400-square-meter mansion, surrounded only by surveillance cameras and bitterness. But at 75, he needed help around the house. That's when Carmen Rodriguez appeared, a 25-year-old girl from a small rural town in Andalusia, who came to Madrid with a cardboard suitcase and a dream of studying art history at Complutense University. She worked as a housekeeper to pay for her studies and even sent money to her parents, who were barely managing a small grocery store. During the interview, Carmen didn't ask about salary or benefits. She was interested in whether she could clean the library without moving books, and if Don Rafael had any food allergies. Don Rafael hired her, but he already had a plan. The next morning, Don Rafael set up the final test. He deliberately left the armored safe in his office open, with 5 million euros in banknotes conspicuously placed inside. He announced that he was going out for a meeting that would last all day. He hid in his secret room on the upper floor, from where he could control all the mansion's cameras. He had set up such tests for all his employees over the past years. Some lasted an hour, others a whole day, but everyone eventually succumbed to temptation. Don Rafael settled comfortably in front of the monitors, ready to see Carmen take the money. He already had the dismissal letter and a statement for the civil guard prepared, another disappointment for his collection. However, what he saw on the monitors completely baffled him. Don Rafael watched the screens with disbelief, for he had seen this story too many times. Carmen meticulously cleaned the library, handling each book with such care that it surprised him. She didn't just dust. She checked covers and neatly rearranged volumes that were slightly out of place. After an hour, Carmen headed to the office. Don Rafael leaned forward. His heart pounded faster. The moment of truth had arrived. Carmen entered and began wiping the desk. The open safe was clearly visible from her spot. The banknotes seemed to glow in the lamplight, but Carmen didn't even glance that way. She continued cleaning, sorting pens in the holder and stacking documents. Don Rafael waited for her gaze to fall on the money, for temptation to overcome her. But instead, Carmen turned around and began dusting the office shelves. Half an hour passed, then an hour. Carmen worked with almost meditative concentration, as if cleaning this house was the most important thing in the world. At one point, she approached the safe dangerously close to dust a painting that concealed it. Don Rafael held his breath. Carmen noticed the safe was open. Don Rafael saw the moment she realized what she was seeing. But instead of approaching or looking closer, Carmen did something completely unexpected. She immediately moved away from the safe, as if it were too hot to approach. She nervously looked around, then picked up the phone and called Don Rafael's office. When the secretary answered, Carmen explained with concern that Mr. Mendoza had forgotten to close the safe before leaving. The secretary told her not to touch anything and to wait for his return. Carmen thought for a few minutes. Then she made a decision that astonished Don Rafael. She found a chair, placed it in front of the safe, and sat down not to look at the money or take it, but to guard it. Don Rafael couldn't believe his eyes. Carmen decided to protect his money. She sat there with her back to the safe, like a sentinel. Sometimes she would get up to continue cleaning other parts of the house, but she always returned to check that everything was in order. During lunch, Carmen made a sandwich in the kitchen, but instead of eating calmly at the table, she returned to the office and had lunch sitting on the chair in front of the safe. Don Rafael became increasingly confused. What kind of person was Carmen Rodriguez? At 5 p.m., the doorbell rang at the mansion. It was a courier with a package. Usually Carmen would open the door, but through the intercom, she explained that the owner was not home and that they needed to come back tomorrow. Don Rafael realized that Carmen was afraid to leave the safe unattended, even for the few minutes it would take to receive the package. She was protecting his money as if it were her own children. Half an hour later, Carmen received a call that made her cry. Don Rafael could only hear part of her conversation, but understood that there were serious problems in her family. Carmen's parents were on the verge of losing their store because they couldn't pay a 30,000 euro debt to the bank. Carmen cried while talking on the phone, explaining that she didn't have that kind of money and that her salary wouldn't nearly cover that amount. Don Rafael saw her desperately looking around, and for a moment, her gaze fell on the open safe. Now or never, Don Rafael thought. Now Carmen will do what everyone else has done, even with the best intentions. Desperation will lead her to that money. But Carmen acted in a way Don Rafael did not expect. She got up from the chair, walked to the safe, and resolutely closed it, turning the combination to ensure it was securely sealed. Then she returned to the chair and continued to cry quietly. Don Rafael realized that Carmen had just sacrificed the opportunity to save her family without betraying his trust. And he didn't even know who this extraordinary girl truly was. Don Rafael remained seated in front of the monitors, completely shaken by what he had just witnessed. In his 75 years, he had met thousands of people, but he had never seen anyone behave like Carmen. The girl had just given up the chance to save her family to preserve trust. Carmen was still sitting in front of the closed safe. Tears streamed down her face, and her gaze was fixed on the phone. Don Rafael understood that she was thinking about how to tell her parents that she couldn't help them. This image pierced him directly in the heart. For the first time in many years, Don Rafael felt something he thought he had lost forever. Genuine emotions. He descended from his hiding place and headed to the main entrance, making noise as if he were truly returning home. Carmen rushed to meet him. Her eyes were still red, but she tried to hide her distress. Immediately, she apologized for the safe, explaining that she had found it open and was afraid to leave it unattended. Don Rafael asked if everything was all right, if anything had happened during his absence. Carmen hesitated for a moment, then forced a smile and said everything was fine. Don Rafael insisted that she looked upset, and eventually Carmen broke down. In tears, she recounted the call from her parents. Their small grocery store had been in crisis for several months. The appearance of a supermarket in their village had cut their customers in half. Now, the bank wanted to close the store because they couldn't pay a 30,000 euro debt. Carmen explained that she had come to Madrid precisely to earn enough money to help her family. But with a housekeeper's salary and university expenses, she could only send home 300 euros a month. This would never be enough to save the store. Don Rafael listened in silence, his heart aching more and more. This girl worked 18 hours a day between university and housework. She lived in a rented room with 3 other students. She ate sandwiches and simple pasta, all for the sake of helping her family and fulfilling her dream of getting a degree. Carmen apologized for crying in front of him, saying she didn't want to involve him in her personal problems. She would find a way to help her parents, perhaps find a second job. Don Rafael remained silent for a few minutes, contemplating, then said he needed to check something in the office and asked her to accompany him. In the office, Don Rafael walked to the safe and began turning the combination. Carmen immediately moved away, explaining that she didn't want to see the combination so as not to be tempted and so that others wouldn't be tempted. But Don Raphael stopped her. He explained that he had intentionally left the safe open that morning. It was a test he conducted with all employees to find out who they truly were. Without exception, everyone had failed this test. Carmen looked at him in shock. Don Raphael explained that after years of betrayals, he had lost faith in humanity. But what Carmen did that day taught him a valuable lesson. There are still honest people in the world. He opened the safe and took out an envelope. Inside were 50,000 euros in cash. He handed them to her, saying that she deserved this amount not only for passing the test, but also for restoring his faith in humanity. Carmen looked at the envelope without taking it. Tears flowed down her face again. She said she couldn't accept the money, that she hadn't done anything special, just done the right thing. Don Raphael smiled for the first time in many months. He explained to her that this was precisely the value, doing the right thing when no one sees and when there is no reward. But what Don Raphael was about to learn about Carmen would completely change his life and the meaning of this test. Carmen looked at the envelope with tear-filled eyes, but still didn't take it. Don Raphael was puzzled. He had just offered the girl more than her parents earned in 2 years. Why was she still hesitating? Carmen wiped away her tears and looked Don Raphael directly in the eyes. Do you like this story? Like and subscribe to the channel. And now let's continue the video. Her words deeply shook Don Raphael. She couldn't accept the money because it didn't belong to her in any way. She had simply performed her duty, and duty is not paid for. But there was something else she wanted to tell him. With a trembling voice, Carmen began a story Don Raphael didn't expect. 2 years ago, when she came to Madrid, she worked as a waitress in a restaurant in the city center. One evening, while clearing tables, she found a wallet forgotten by a customer. Inside were documents, credit cards, and 2,000 euros in cash. Carmen gave everything to the restaurant owner so he could return the wallet to the customer. But the next day, it turned out that the man had appropriated the money, telling the customer that there were only documents in the wallet. That night, Carmen cried for hours, not because of the money she could have kept, but because she realized how cruel the world could be to honest people. She promised herself never to let someone else's greed change her. Don Raphael listened intently. He began to understand that Carmen was honest not simply by nature, but deliberately chose to remain so, despite disappointment. Carmen continued, explaining that when she saw the safe open that morning, she immediately realized it was a test, not due to any special cleverness, but because she had already heard stories about rich people testing their employees in similar ways. Don Raphael was speechless. Carmen knew it was a test from the beginning, and yet she acted honestly, but Carmen wasn't finished. With each word, her voice became more agitated. She revealed that she knew Don Raphael much better than he thought. It wasn't a coincidence that the agency offered her this job. Carmen specifically wanted to work for him. Don Raphael was surprised. Why did she specifically want to work for him? Carmen pulled a yellowed newspaper clipping from her bag. It was a 3-year-old article about Don Raphael's donations to a children's hospital in Seville. The article stated that Don Raphael had paid for the medical treatment of 15 sick children out of his own pocket but asked to remain anonymous. Carmen explained that one of those children was her cousin, Paco. The child had a heart defect requiring expensive surgery. The family couldn't afford the intervention, and medical insurance didn't cover this type of experimental surgery. One day, without explanation, the hospital called, informing them that an anonymous benefactor had paid all of Paco's medical expenses. The operation was successful, and now Paco was a healthy and happy child. Carmen accidentally learned the benefactor's name when a nurse inadvertently dropped a document with Don Raphael's name on it. Since then, she had researched his biography and found out that he had been making anonymous donations to hospitals, schools, orphanages, and families in need for many years. That's why Carmen wanted to work for him, not for money or opportunities, but because she wanted to meet the man who saved her cousin's life. She wanted to understand what kind of person does good without asking for anything in return. Don Rafael was stunned. For years, he thought he was surrounded only by people interested in his money, and in front of him stood a girl seeking him out of admiration for his generosity. Carmen explained that this was why she couldn't accept his money. Don Rafael had already done so much for her family by saving Paco. Accepting more would be dishonest. Don Rafael was silent for a long time, processing what he had heard, then did something that surprised them both. He cried. These were tears of relief, joy, and emotion. For the first time in many years, he truly felt understood and appreciated for who he was, not for what he had. But Don Rafael also had a secret he had to reveal, one that would forever change Carmen's life. Don Rafael wiped away his tears and looked at Carmen with an expression she had never seen before. In his gaze, there was tenderness, gratitude, but also something more. An important decision. He asked her to sit down because he had something very important to say. Don Rafael began by explaining that the safe test was not just a way to identify dishonest people, but something much deeper and more personal. He was 75 years old, had no children, and his brother had died 10 years ago. His only relatives were his nephew and niece. Both were only interested in the inheritance. For many years, Don Rafael had been looking for someone to whom he could leave not only money, but also his values, his worldview, and his commitment to helping others. He had tested dozens of people, employees, assistants, beneficiaries of donations, but all of them failed. The safe test was the final test to find a moral heir. He wasn't just looking for someone who wouldn't steal money, but someone who deserved to take on the responsibility of doing good in the world. Then Don Rafael continued, explaining that in recent years he had created a charitable foundation that managed most of his fortune. The foundation helped needy families, funded medical research, and supported young talents like Carmen. But he needed a trusted person to continue the work when he was gone. All the money Don Rafael spent on anonymous donations, including Paco's operation, came from this foundation. Now he needed someone who shared his vision to continue this work. Don Rafael stood up, walked to the safe, took out a thick dossier, and placed it on the table in front of Carmen. It was his will, modified that same day after he saw Carmen's behavior through the surveillance cameras. Carmen was becoming Don Rafael Mendoza's main heir, not only his money, but also the responsibility of managing the foundation that helped thousands of people. It was a huge responsibility, but Don Rafael was sure Carmen was the right person. He added that, of course, he would immediately solve the problem of her parents' store, not as payment for passing the test, but as the first act of their cooperation. Carmen would continue her studies, but also begin to learn how to manage the foundation. Finally, Carmen found her voice and told Don Rafael that it was an honor to earn his trust, but she didn't feel worthy of such a great responsibility. She was just a student from a village, knowing nothing about managing large sums of money. Don Rafael smiled and said that was precisely why he chose her. People who thought they knew everything about money often forgot its true purpose. Carmen, who had always had little, knew how important every euro was and how it could change people's lives. With a trembling voice, Carmen agreed. Not for money or power, but because she understood. Don Rafael was offering her a chance to change thousands of lives, just as he had once changed Paco's life. Don Rafael hugged her as a father hugs a daughter. For the first time in many years, they both felt they had found a true family. 6 months later, Carmen's life had completely changed, but not in the way many might have imagined. She didn't live in luxury, but found her purpose in life. Every morning she woke up at 6 a.m. to study. During the day, she spent time in the offices of the Mendoza Foundation, learning from Don Rafael how to turn money into hope. Her parents' store was saved and now thrived thanks to a foundation program supporting small businesses in struggling villages. Jose and Maria Rodriguez didn't know that their salvation came thanks to their daughter, because Carmen asked Don Rafael to keep it anonymous even from them. Carmen graduated from university with honors in art history, but discovered that her true passion was helping people. Under Don Rafael's guidance, she learned to evaluate charitable projects, manage donations, and create programs to support needy families. In 6 months, the foundation helped hundreds of families, sick children who received free treatment, young talents who received scholarships, elderly lonely people who found help. Carmen realized that every story was similar to her own. Honest people who found themselves in difficult situations and just needed a chance. Don Rafael, in turn, rediscovered the joy of life. Seeing Carmen grow in her new role rekindled his enthusiasm for his projects. He no longer felt like a lonely and embittered man, but a mentor shaping a successor. Their relationship became like that of a grandfather and granddaughter. They dined together every day, discussing philosophy, art, and the meaning of life. The mansion in the Sierra de Madrid mountains transformed from a quiet mausoleum into a house full of life. One spring day, while reviewing the foundation's projects for the next year, Don Rafael confessed that he had one more confession to make. He explained that the safe test wasn't the first time he had observed her. 3 months before hiring her, he conducted a thorough investigation. He hired a private detective to follow her for a week. The detective reported that Carmen always shared food with the poorest neighbors, helped an elderly woman in her house with groceries, and gave her savings to a fellow student to pay for a medical exam. Don Rafael realized then that she was special. The safe test was just final confirmation of what he already knew. He had found the moral heir he had been searching for years. Carmen smiled, not angry at being followed, but touched by the fact that Don Rafael had seen something good in her even before meeting her in person. Don Rafael took out the last document from the safe. It was a project he had nurtured for years, but never implemented. He wanted to create a network of young people like Carmen across Spain, honest and determined individuals who could manage charitable foundations in their regions. The project was called Network of Hope, and aimed to identify and train a new generation of philanthropists who would share Don Rafael's and Carmen's values. Carmen looked at the project with shining eyes. It was perfect. Instead of concentrating all power in one person's hands, they would create a network of exceptional individuals who would bring hope to every corner of Spain. That evening, dining with Don Rafael on the terrace overlooking the Sierra de Madrid, Carmen reflected on the incredible journey that led her from working as a housekeeper, guarding an open safe, to a woman responsible for changing thousands of lives. Don Rafael's test revealed much more than either of them could have imagined. It not only revealed Carmen's honesty, but also created a bond that would bring hope to people who didn't even know they needed it. Don Rafael smiled, looking at Carmen as she contemplated the lights of Madrid in the distance. He was 75 years old, but for the first time, he felt immortal. His most important legacy was not money or property, but the values he passed on to an extraordinary girl and which she would carry for generations to come. Carmen looked up and met Don Rafael's gaze. Without saying a word, they both knew they had found what they were looking for. A family built not on blood or profit, but on trust, respect, and a shared dream. The safe test was over, but their shared story was just beginning. If this story touched you and made you think about the value of honesty, please like and share. Carmen and Don Rafael prove that there are still people in this world you can trust. Subscribe for more touching stories. Activate the bell. Remember, honesty is not just a virtue, it's an investment in the future. The one who does the right thing when no one is watching is the person on whom a better world can be built.